Welcome back to class. This particular lecture is going to look at culture because as you can probably figure out, culture is a pretty significant thing in this class. As we try and get better and more critical in how we interact with people from different backgrounds, we really need to figure out the influence that culture is having on us and the influence culture is having on the interaction. So let's just take a few more minutes to figure out what exactly it is that we're talking about when we talk about culture. In the things that you've done so far, you've seen things like symbols, language, values, norms. Uh, so this culture, this idea of how one group differs from another group, symbols might be something like a flag or a cross or a mascot or colors. Language might be the kind of inside jokes that you have. Or, for instance, I would say that there's really a Christian language. And when we talk to people who don't have a faith background, sometimes these concepts are hard to talk about because they might not share the same language that we've been using. Values, what's good and what's bad, right? Is this a good thing or is it a bad thing? Is that person a good person or a bad person? Well, a lot of those values depends on what kind of culture we're in. Norms has to do with the way things operate, right? So, for instance, the way things operate at Bethel, uh, there's very structured, like where do you go to do your homework? Some of that has depends on kind of who your subgroup is. Maybe it depends on the majors. There's a music major lounge and there's a commuter lounge and there's like places that political science people and English majors sit. No one actually told you that, you figured it out, but there's norms like how it is that you're supposed to work. All those things impact us. In many ways, culture is like a lens, right? So we don't just look at reality around us. We are always looking through the lens of culture. In other words, we have been shaped by this lens. And so when we think that we see things exactly how we are, we're actually seeing the way that it's been distorted and the way that it's been presented to us through this lens. For instance, how we behave. Culture impacts how we do things, the language that we use, how we do work, whether it's individual, whether it's in groups, whether it's when we have time, whether it's like you put away everything else and you do the work. How we solve challenges, problems, conflicts. Is it passive aggressive? Is it very direct? Is it emotional? Is it like really like totally no emotion? Is it like through technology? Do you, if you're really ticked off at someone, do you kind of slip it in an email or do you go slamming into their office and yell at them? What is the way that you're supposed to do conflict? And how you go about creating relationships, how you meet people. How close do you expect to get to people? If we hang out and we're friends, does that mean like we're friends for life? Or does that mean like maybe I'll see you again and let's be Facebook friends and maybe I'll talk to you like once or twice next year? So what is friendship? How do we go about creating it? All of these rules about how we behave, they're inside us. Like we don't even think about it sometimes. And they've been shaped by the cultures that are impacting us. Culture also impacts how we evaluate others, right? Is that person a good person or a bad person? Is that person successful or unsuccessful? So, for instance, someone who's seen as successful in the United States might be someone who has a lot of money, who has a lot of stuff, who's like very sophisticated, whereas that person may be seen as not as successful as someone in another culture, someone who is kind and humble and very committed to their family and has rich relationships. So, what do you use to judge people? A lot of it has to do with your culture, and also what's right and wrong, right? So is sleeping around right or wrong? Well, you and I might have a certain perspective on that that is not shared by other people in other cultures, right? Is it okay to slurp your food? Is that right or wrong? Well, I've been taught from I don't know how little I was, that you are quiet. You are really quiet when you eat. Of course, other places, when you do that, they're like, man, you must not enjoy the food because you're not making food noises, right? So, how do we evaluate others? Culture also impacts how we evaluate ourselves, right? Are you seen as smart or unsmart? Not smart, like like not smart. Um, a lot of that has to do with the people you're hanging around. A lot of it has to do with how culture has defined you, right? Are you popular or unpopular? Um, One example that just comes back to me a lot is my son is teaching uh, English in South Korea, and before that in Japan. And it's interesting because in this culture, he's fairly quiet. He's just a very kind person. But I'm not sure that that made him like the popular person. Not like some of the other guys that he hung out who were like always out there and like totally like the big guy on campus. But in the Asian cultures he's been part of, the things that he's good at are highly valued in that society. So he has become much more popular there because he is such a kind sort of person and a little bit outgoing, but really laid back and not too bothered by certain things. And so those characteristics are more highly valued in that culture. Our culture helps us figure out, where we sit on the totem pole, right? What kind of status we have. Are we good at what we do, or are we really not that good at what we do? For instance, I went to Anoka High School. Anoka High School was huge. Like it was like 800 or 900 people that I graduated with. Um, and I played the bass clarinet, right? Or and I was never like awesome. And I never saw myself as awesome. But then when I came to Bethel, Bethel was a much smaller. The band was much smaller. It just, there's fewer people really involved in some of the things I was involved with, and all of a sudden I was like, I was the best bass clarinet player they had. I was like, awesome. So how we see ourselves really depends on the people and the culture that we're part of. Are we good or bad? Are we spiritual or unspiritual? Man, I see this at Bethel a lot. The Bethel culture really helps us define what kind of Christian we are. And what's really interesting is when I do study abroad trips to other places and we interact with other kinds of Christians, it's like they have a different set of guidelines or a different set of criteria of what makes someone spiritual. And so you have to wonder, well, how much of my Christianity is like biblical and like really grounded in what Christian faith is, and how much of it is Bethel culture, how much of it is U.S. culture. Um, so being able to parse through that, I think, is really important. Culture impacts us. The culture that we are around gives us an idea of where we fit, of how we're supposed to act, and how we evaluate other people. Now, there's one other thing. We talked a little bit about previously about the iceberg, and the above the iceberg is what you see, and below is really kind of these deeper personal sorts of things. But there's also this question of what's cultural values and norms and things, and what's just like that's how that person is, right? And that's always this tension. Is this cultural, or is this based on like how people act, this person acts, or is it based on like everybody? So if something is cultural, it's what a group of people have in common with each other and how they're different from other groups. And that's different than personal, where it's like each person is different from one another, which is in turn different from like, well, that's just how people act, right? So some of this analysis that you're going to end up doing, you have to parse through, well, what's cultural, what's personal. So for instance, I spent a lot of time in Vienna, living in Vienna, and I noticed like there's a certain behavior of how you're supposed to act in the subway. First of all, you don't look people in the eye, you look down, right? If you look up, you have to only look up when the other person's not looking, because if they see you looking at them, it's like, oh, that's really bad. And then you have to be like kind of quiet, right? So, but then it's like, okay, is this a cultural thing? Is this how they do things in Austria? Is this like a big city thing? This is how you do it when you're in a big city, right? This is how every culture, this is how you do it. Or is it more like, that these people that I'm with, some of them do it, some of them don't. And it just seems like that person right there seems to be a little bit quieter. Well, for a long time, I thought this was a universal sort of thing. Like people in all subways, this is how they act. Until I get to Spain, and people are like looking at me. People are like looking at other people, like, "Hey, baby!" Like everybody's like got all this eye contact, and it's like, whoa, whoa. Is it like that? Is that guy just a jerk, or is this a cultural thing? And then we go to Poland, and we had this one woman, and she's like watching us. A lot of people, this happened a lot. Like the older people would be watching our group, and every now and then, if we did something wrong, they'd be like scolding us and telling us what we did wrong. And when they do it in Polish, it's even worse. So it's like, well, wow, is this woman have a problem? Is this just like this woman thing? Is this a Polish thing? Is, so basically, what I'm trying to say through all these subway examples is you have to be able to parse through what's cultural, what's personal, and what's universal. And to help you do that, what I'd like you to do is to go take a really quick quiz to kind of get in there and there's just a bunch of examples, and you just label whether it's a culture with the big C, like this is Polish culture, or culture with a little c, like this is culture in general. So do that. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.